Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I have just done two interviews on the last 2 days with two experts in the housing industry. Aled Ed Ibawath, Deputy Chief Economist of CMHC, and Richard Lyle, the head of the Residential Construction Council of Ontario. Both of them have talked about how this is a crisis. And I think that we've got to really give some detailed thought to how bad this crisis is, how a bust, boom, boom, bust, boom scenario can destroy a lot of people's lives. I think that we've got a situation where, we have this intergenerational inequity where it's completely unaffordable for young people to afford housing. And then at the same time, we've got a whole bunch of people that have built up a big net worth in housing that probably they should have been investing in other things to ensure their retirement. And if we have a bust, they're going to lose money. And particularly if they entered into home equity lines of credit or mortgages or something like that to maximize the leverage on overinflated housing, they could end up having a problem. So it hurts people on the boom and it hurts people on the bust. And we got to realize that as we go through this. And it's the same as almost any other boom bust cycle where it can harm people, and housing should go up by GDP. It shouldn't be an investment. It should be something that is, if not a right, damn close to a right, and should be the same percentage of income over time, or the same multiple of income over time, the same percentage from a mortgage carrying standpoint, and the same multiple from a total price standpoint. From generation to generation, from year to year, from decade to decade, there's no justification for it to increase at dramatically higher rates, other than maybe if it's, on water or uniquely positioned at Main and Main or Bay and King or something like that. So yes, location does warrant some appreciation above what average appreciation would be, but general housing shouldn't. We should make enough of it such that it goes up by GDP. So I've got a 10-point program that I want to propose that I think we need to address, because I think we need politicians and we need the public to realize that we're in a crisis situation. And we really have gone from 2 years ago, FOMO, fear of missing out, such that everyone was overbidding and prices were booming and prices got to a high, to today, FOOP, where it's a fear of overpaying and no one is willing to pay. And as Richard Lyle talked about, he's worried that we're going to have hundreds of thousands of layoffs, leading to a 1.5% to 2% decline in GDP. We can't risk that. We can't risk the layoffs. We can't risk the unemployment. We can't risk the devastation to our economy. We can't risk the decline to GDP. We can't risk what's going to ultimately be the result of that, which is going to be another boom in a couple of years, because there's no housing available. And our young people become even more sentenced to a life without the Canadian dream of owning a house. It's wrong, and we need to address it. So here's my 10-point plan. First of all, I think we need to change the whole attitude of government, and particularly people in city planning and city councils and planning committees, etc., from the planning department attitude that's been, we want to stop development in the past, to more like the economic development department, which is we want to attract development to our cities. And they need to become customer focused. They need to become focused on what we can do to build great cities rather than what we can do to stop development from happening. So I think we need to have a complete changed attitude. And if we believe that this crisis is happening and it's going to cause layoffs, it's going to cause devastation, it's going to cause a drop in GDP, it's going to cause housing and affordability, and we need to have an attention to it like we did in the pandemic, like we are, I think, in regards to the threat of Trump tariffs, then we'll take the kind of action that we need to take. So number one, change the whole attitude within municipal politicians and within municipal planning departments to be more like the economic development. We want to attract building. We want to attract development rather than we want to push it away. Number two, development fees should go to zero right away. A couple of years from now, if you want to increase them again, we can talk about it. But for now, in this crisis scenario, they should go to zero. And I don't think there's any other choice. We need to take that $100,000 to $150,000, which is equal to the kind of down payment that a lot of people would pay. This unbelievable growth pays for growth, incorrect belief that developers pay for the development fees, not the end consumer. This unbelievably, probably the most regressive tax, as Richard Lyle has talked about, a sin tax comparable to cigarettes or alcohol, which is discouraging people to consume, which is not what we should be having on housing. We need to eliminate it completely right away. Zero. Do we need to come up with another way of funding infrastructure? No question. And I think it's the way that the United States funds it, whether the whole society pays for it by way of municipal tax bonds, or whether it's just funded through property taxes, or whether it's funded by infrastructure that comes from the provincial or federal government. Yes, we need to come up with a different way. But to have these development fees that have gone up by 1,000% over the course of the last decade, that's creating $3 billion worth of a surplus for the city of Toronto, that is regressive, that the people that can least afford it are asked to pay for it. We need to get rid of it, and rid of it right away. Zero, right away, across the board. Number 3, GST, HST on housing. You know, we put in this consumption tax. Brian Mulroney did back, 40 years ago, and it may have made sense to be as broad-based and across the board as possible, but we've taken it off heat and oil at different times. We've taken it off different items that have been deemed strategic to our economy and important to people. We need to take it off of housing right now. If we want people to be building housing, if we want people to be buying housing, we need to take it off right now. You know, I think that taxation is one of those things that you increase in good times and you decrease in tough times. Keynesian economics, this is a crisis time. The GST, the HST, the provincial sales taxes on housing, on all things that go into housing, eliminated right now. We're in a crisis situation. Number 4, provincial rules should be imposed that effectively provide as of right housing. I'm doing development in Texas. Everyone in Texas is talking about this new Senate bill that effectively means that you've got as of right zoning within a city that's over 150,000 population, where the most beneficial density zoning applies across the board. So if a city has decided that a certain density is appropriate, they apply it across the board. And I think it's a simple way of simplifying how many different zoning designations we have. I think what we need to do is we need to get rid of a lot of these rules and regulations that different cities put in place, that different municipalities put in place, that different wards within municipalities put in place, and frankly, different councillors and different planning people in different parts of different wards of different cities end up putting in place. We need to simplify that. We need to quicken up the process of getting approval. It makes no sense that it takes 2 to 3 times as long to get something approved as it does to build it. We need as of right zoning. I think that the MTSA rules that were thought about that dramatically increase density and height around major transit station areas, and not just on the streets, but in a circle radius, as people thought about walking to major transit. That's the right type of change, and we need those types of zonings around major transit station areas. We need the main street zonings. We need the sixplexes as of right on regular streets. We need to dramatically decrease the rules and regulations in regards to what you can build, and make it as of right, so people can quicken up the process of getting approvals, submitting building plans, and getting under construction. Number 5, inclusionary zoning, where we give more affordable development available to people, is critically important, but it should be done by way of an incentive, not a disincentive. By having the inclusionary zoning, the 10% of the homes that you want at below market rates being paid for by the other people in that condo building or apartment building, makes no sense. It's a regressive taxation on the people that can least afford it. It should be something that is carried by all the society. The bill that was passed in Florida, which effectively means that if a developer builds inclusionary zoning, they get a reduction in property tax for the next 20 years, makes a ton of sense. Because what that does is it means that all of society shares the cost of providing inclusionary zoning, not a regressive taxation on one part. So affordable housing is something we need to do it, but the way that we've been enforcing it is wrong, and it needs to change. Number 6, I think what we need to do is we need to think of housing as the best social program out there. I think that the statistics and this book called Abundance that's been written in the United States is excellent. What it does is it shows where we've got increased the supply of housing, home homelessness goes down dramatically. And so we've got to take a look at all these progressive people, these left-wing people that say that they want to decrease homelessness, but come up with all these massive programs to deal with it. The best program is to take them off the street and give them a home. And the best way to do that is by way of dramatically increasing supply. Across the United States, it's been proven, in Canada as well, that if you have an increase in housing supply, you'll have less homeless. And so we need to make that available. Does it need to be affordable? Does it often need to be social housing? Yes, but we need to make sure that people have an opportunity to put a roof over their head. I had one interviewee that told me that homeless people visit on average emergency wards 100 times a year. I don't believe that statistic. Maybe it's homeless people with mental health issues. I'm not sure. I want to find out. But it makes logical sense that if you're homeless and you need some care, if you're cold, if you're hungry, if you need some drugs, medication, etc., you're going to go to emergency. And that is one of the reasons why our emergency room waits are too long. If we give them a home, I was told that it costs less than $100,000. But if they're on the street, it costs us in excess of $500,000. So it's a 5 times increase for society to not give them a home. So let's deal with our homelessness problem by making more housing available. 7, we need CMHC to become more aggressive. This change that they've taken the amount of debt that they're willing to finance from 95% down to 75% and putting the risk on rents on private developers. You know what? They should take some risk, but it's not that kind of differential in leverage, because what's happened is purpose-built rental has gone down dramatically in that regard. And so we need to have CMHC more aggressive in providing financing and shouldering some of that risk. The whole idea here was that they were going to take some risk of the housing leverage, and we need to have CMHC increase the amount of funds they've got available and increase the amount of leverage that they're willing to provide to developers. Number 8. There's been a real lack of productivity within housing, and I think that's caused by this plethora of different zoning, the plethora of different building codes, the lack of modernization of building codes, the constant changing of building codes, etc. We need to focus on making sure that we've got some consistency in zoning, consistency in building codes, focused on productivity, less rules and regulations, so that we can become more productive. Why do we have far smaller housing companies in Canada that don't have the economies of scale that they would elsewhere in the world, particularly in the United States? We need to think through that. We need to have the role of AI, the role of digital twins, the role of economies of scale, like we've got in every other industry in the world, apply to housing and figure out how we can do that. Number 9, tariffs, reciprocal tariffs, tariffs in the United States, tariffs on furniture, tariffs on HVAC, tariffs on electrical equipment. We've got to solve this tariff war. We got to solve it for the economy in general, but we got to solve it in housing particularly. And the fact that the Americans are taxing our lumber at outrageous amounts such that their housing is going to become more expensive doesn't make sense. And the fact that we then put on reciprocal tariffs on aluminum, steel, mechanical equipment, electrical equipment that is coming into Canada that we need for housing makes no sense. We need to solve that problem. And number 10, we need more people in the housing industry. We need more skilled laborers. We need to do training. We need to do apprenticeship. We need to think about immigration that attracts people that have got those skills such that we can bring them to Canada to work. I'm really worried about what Richard Lyles talked about mass layoffs. And then what do those people do? They move into other industries. They move into other geographies, and we can never get them back. We need to be thinking about having the right kind of employment in housing, given this crisis scenario, that we would have for doctors, that we would have for nurses, that we would have for people with STEM experience, that people would have for quantum computing, areas of industry that are critically important. We need to have a labor market strategy. We need to have a labor market strategy for housing. So crisis situation, we need to acknowledge and admit and put an all government and all business industry effort into solving. We need to have an economic development attitude. We need to have a elimination of development fees. We need to have a elimination of the GST on housing. We need to think about provincial rules rather than a plethora of rules in all municipalities. We need to think about market housing, affordable housing from a all of society standpoint rather than the inclusionary zoning that we've had in the past. We need to get rid of homelessness by providing more housing and make housing a right. We need to have CMHC and government support housing with more financing and higher leverage. We need to have productivity orientation to housing and thinking about economies of scale. We need to eliminate tariffs on the inputs to housing. And we need to have a labor market strategy for our housing. That's my 10-point plan to solve the housing crisis. But the most important thing, the old thing about draining the swamp is understanding you're in one. We've got to understand we are in a housing crisis. We've had a boom. We're having a bust. We're going to end up having another boom. That's not the way to manage an industry, or let alone something that's so critically important to our economy and critically important to all of us. Making sure that we don't have this intergenerational inequity such that people my age have huge net worth in their homes and people my kids' age can never afford a home. It's just not fair. It's just not right. We need to address it right now. We need to take attention to this crisis that is at our doorstep and address it. Thanks for joining. Thank you for listening. I'm Brian Crombie, Brian Crombie Radio Hour on every night, 6 o'clock, 9:60 a.m. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. You can get all my podcast videos on my website, briancrombie.com, on YouTube channel, on social media, on podcasts. Thanks. Good night.